Something you don't really see video game consoles do much these days is release a bunch of extraneous peripherals and add-ons. But it wasn't really that long ago that consoles would see new add-ons semi-regularly. The PS3 and Xbox 360 saw the PlayStation Move and the Xbox Kinect respectively, both of which were a direct answer to the Nintendo Wii and its built-in motion controls. The PS2 saw stuff like the Sony iToy, the GameCube had the Game Boy Player and the GBA Link cable, and even as recently as the Nintendo Switch, we saw things like Labo, I don't know. I googled it and I get different... People are saying different things on how it's supposed to be pronounced, I don't know. Nowadays, consoles are basically just sanded down PCs. While they often come in standard, pro, or premium models with varying levels of power, what comes in the box is usually the full scope of what the console can do. Very rarely are modern video game companies releasing secondary products to supplement the existing hardware. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a single add-on peripheral for the PS4 or PS5, and same for the most recent Xbox consoles. But I think the reason we don't see many console peripherals is because, simply put, they have a reputation for being incredibly hit or miss. And also, frankly, modern consumers just typically aren't willing to spend extra money on quote-unquote enhancing their consoles for something that usually amounts to little more than a gimmick. Nintendo, in particular, was at one point infamous for their boatload of console add-ons. I suppose it makes sense. After all, they were at one point largely seen as a toy manufacturer. The NES especially saw plenty of add-ons, some great, some infamous, and some just downright bizarre. Through future console generations, they would show a bit more restraint, but Nintendo still occasionally gets confident enough to experiment with add-ons even today. Meanwhile, Sega's approach to console add-ons was always a bit of a contrast to Nintendo's. Rather than focusing on controller gimmicks or portable connectivity, Sega's add-ons would essentially act as consoles in their own right. The Sega CD added CD-ROM quality graphics and audio to the Genesis, and the 32X upped the sprite and color count while adding some limited polygon capabilities. Unfortunately, neither of these were seen as huge successes, with the 32X in particular remembered as arguably one of the biggest catalysts in Sega's downfall as a console manufacturer. And while the Sega Saturn didn't see any truly notable peripherals beyond alternative controllers, it could be said that their next console, the Dreamcast, launched with a kind of peripheral already on the shelves. The Dreamcast's VMU, the Visual Memory Unit, was a memory card that doubled as its own separate LCD game player, with its own built-in screen and set of buttons. This was a really neat idea for the time. Video game peripherals were still an expected commodity back then, and the late 90s were also something of a peak for handheld LCD electronics. Combining those two ideas into one was an exciting, if expensive and extraneous, proposition. And apparently, Sony had gotten wind of Sega's plans for the VMU, and decided the idea was too good to pass up. In mid-1998, they announced their own memory card LCD game hybrid in the form of the Sony PocketStation, and planned to release it that Christmas to coincide with the Japanese launch of the Dreamcast. The PocketStation would end up being delayed by a full month, and once it did finally release, it would never leave Japan. Many people then may be prone to assume that the PocketStation didn't sell well enough to warrant an international release. But according to official word from Sony, the truth may in fact be the exact opposite. Much like Sega's VMU, the PocketStation is a memory card peripheral onto which players can download minigames to play outside of the main PlayStation console, using a built-in LCD screen and buttons. Both devices also feature built-in clocks. When compared to the VMU, the PocketStation is smaller, thinner, and sleeker, and runs on one fewer battery. For multiplayer, VMUs can connect to one another via a set of prongs, while PocketStations have IR sensors that allow for contactless peer-to-peer interactivity, which can also be used to transfer save files directly between cards. Overall, the PocketStation's sleeker design does a lot of the heavy lifting here because, to me, it does feel a lot cheaper and less durable than the VMU, despite retailing at a slightly higher price, believe it or not. The VMU's buttons are made of rubber and provide clear tactile feedback without requiring strain to press. It has a D-pad, A and B buttons, and dedicated buttons for switching game modes or putting the device to sleep to save battery. The PocketStation, meanwhile, only has the 4 directional buttons and one singular A button. There's no way to forcibly put the device in sleep mode, and every possible interaction with the device has to be done with just one face button. Those buttons also feel awful to press, made from harsh plastic that digs into your skin while somehow also feeling like they could snap at any moment. And the reason the buttons are like this is simply due to the way the device had to be designed to operate as a memory card. The Sega Dreamcast was built with the VMU in mind, and the VMU plugged into dedicated slots on the controller rather than the console itself. The PocketStation, though, still plugs into the main PlayStation like any other memory card, and in order to fit the slot, the device had to be designed with a cover that flipped up to reveal its circuit board. The buttons on the PocketStation's lid have to be able to interact with the circuit board through the plastic cover, and the overall simple, some might say flimsy, nature of the device is why the buttons feel the way they do. It's also really easy to snap the cover piece right off. Matter of fact, when I was getting ready to record footage for this video, I managed to pop the lid clean off just from accidentally opening it a little too fast. Luckily, nothing was damaged and I could just snap it right back on, but still, it should not be this easy to potentially break this thing. And since the PocketStation has to be plugged into the main console in order to interface with it, it means there's no way for it to interact with the player during gameplay like the VMU could. While not every Dreamcast game came up with a good in-game use for the VMU, the ones that did managed to do so in pretty unique and even vital ways. The Dreamcast Resident Evil titles would show the player's current health on the controller, saving them the trouble of opening the menu to check. Sonic Shuffle displayed each player's hand of cards on the VMU rather than on the main screen, preventing other players from peeking. Skies of Arcadia had the VMU beep to indicate the location of certain hidden items, providing a real-time game of hot and cold. The PocketStation couldn't do anything like that. The only time you could directly interact with it was when it was outside of the console itself. I will say that I think the PocketStation's screen is noticeably clearer and crisper than the VMU, but in pretty much every other way that actually matters, the PocketStation comes off as the lesser copycat. Despite this, though, the PocketStation ended up being a big success in Japan. The initial shipment of 60,000 units practically flew off shelves, and any renewed stock would regularly sell out. It makes sense. Japan was huge on LCD games such as Tamagotchi, which is something the PocketStation would do very well. While PocketStation compatibility was usually something designed secondarily to a larger console game, i.e. through bonuses that could be gained by connecting to the peripheral, occasionally there would be certain PS1 games cater-built for the PocketStation. And this was the case with the Pocket Digimon World games, an expansion of the Digimon Virtual Pets taking place within the setting of the first Digimon World game. Similar to the V-Pets themselves, Pocket Digimon World came in 3 different versions, each with a different roster of available monsters to raise. The main game acted as something akin to, say, Pokemon Stadium. While there was a bare-bones plot to follow and miniature objectives to complete, the console half of Pocket Digimon World was essentially a vehicle through which to battle with your monsters. Ultimately, the PocketStation would remain a Japanese exclusive. And it would be easy to assume that this was due to poor sales, but according to Sony themselves, this actually isn't the case. The PocketStation consistently sold well in Japan, maybe too well, in fact. The PocketStation actually performed better than Sony had hoped, to the point where production struggled to keep up, and as a result, they weren't confident that they'd be able to meet demand for foreign markets. So even after the PocketStation was officially announced for international release in early 1999, these plans were eventually cancelled in favor of focusing purely on meeting Japanese demand. As a result, many games that came with PocketStation functionality in Japan had these mechanics removed in their Western localizations. Sometimes this meant PocketStation exclusive rewards would be reworked into the main game somehow, but more often than not, this just meant that worldwide audiences missed out on that content entirely. One instance where this personally applies to me is with Digimon World 2. In Japan, the PocketStation was the only means through which to obtain a Chimeramon, but now the monster is just totally missing in the American release. Confusing the matter even further, the official English strategy guide professed that Chimeramon still existed in the game as a hidden post-game superboss, but this simply wasn't true. While the code for Chimeramon was left in the game, without the PocketStation it's simply impossible to obtain or encounter one now, other than through cheat devices of course. In very rare instances though, PocketStation functionality was left intact. The 2 biggest examples of this were both titles from Square, Saga Frontier 2 and Final Fantasy VIII. The latter of which in particular is arguably the biggest reason why people outside of Japan even know about the PocketStation to begin with. During the very short window where we were unsure whether the PocketStation would be released over here, Square decided to play things safe and translate FF8's minigame rather than remove it. And given that PocketStations aren't region-locked, FF8's Chocobo World is still completely playable to American audiences. All you have to do is import one. Chocobo World has more than a few similarities to Sonic Adventure's VMU minigame, Chow Adventure, which I discussed in my Sonic Adventure video a few months ago. In it, your baby Chocobo, known as a Chocobo, named Boko, hey, FF5 reference, that's cool, travels along a map toward various waypoints in search of items, weapons, and battles. Items obtained in Chocobo World can be transferred back to FF8, with certain powerful items only found via the minigame. Chocobo World is self-described as a solo RPG, as in an RPG that can be played completely autonomously. While the player can direct Boko's movement as well as alter his search radius in the menu, almost everything in Chocobo World is automatic. Boko always beelines toward the nearest point of interest, and battles require 0 player input. They operate on a version of the ATB system, with 2 gauges counting down. The first to 0 performs an attack, and then both counters reset. Upon winning a battle, a roulette begins, and once a bingo is attained by lining up 3 spaces in a row, Boko levels up by 1 and moves on to the next map. Boko's current level also feeds back into FF8 itself, as at higher levels, the secret Chocobo summon will perform more powerful attacks. Chocobo World is interesting, but ultimately I feel like it relies too much on random outcomes. Your Chocobo's weapon, base HP, and even its max level is all determined by the serial number of your PocketStation, and this can only be changed by interacting with another PocketStation to steal their ID number. Battles play out on their own whether you want them to or not, and I'm still not entirely sure what actually determines my damage output. My Chocobo would regularly get more turns than the enemy, but his attacks were consistently dealing 0 damage, and so it was frustrating watching Boko repeatedly outpace the enemy, but completely fail to chip away at their HP at all, only for the enemy to KO me after getting just 1 hit in. No exaggeration, I was losing about 8 out of every 10 battles, through no fault of my own. I kept hoping I'd run into Moomba so he could get me a better weapon, but then when he finally showed up after around an hour or so, he brought me the same exact weapon I had started with. Wow, thanks. The rewards you get from Chocobo World are really nothing special. You'll be fine playing through FF8 without them. Still, much like Chao Adventure, it's easy to just let the PocketStation do its thing in the background while you play. Actively engaging with Chocobo World can be pretty boring, even frustrating at times. But if you're the type who just wants to get the exclusive items, it's overall a pretty painless experience. Just don't expect to get a level 100 Chocobo without a cheat device, because odds are you'll never get the right ID number legitimately. Chocobo World is little more than a curiosity now. The PC port of FF8 came included with a version of the minigame that could run at the same time, and this was also true of the Steam version up through 2019. But as of the release of FF8 Remastered, Chocobo World has been removed entirely, with all of the PocketStation exclusive items now accessible through other in-game means. Despite being little more than a gimmick in the grand scheme, the PocketStation went on to be a fairly successful peripheral. So much so that there are even certain American-developed games that would sometimes have PocketStation compatibility added in their Japanese version, as was the case with Spyro the Dragon, for instance. Before its discontinuation in 2002, over 5 million PocketStations were sold, an impressive number when you consider that they were only ever sold in one country. In 2013, Sony even released a PocketStation app for Japanese Vitas, which allowed downloaded PS1 games to retain any bonuses associated with the device. Looking back now, the PocketStation feels like a product from a very specific era. There was a time when console manufacturers were willing to experiment with strange accessories, even if only a handful of them caught on. Today, consoles are expected to do everything out of the box, and devices like the PocketStation and VMU have become relics of a time when companies were still figuring out what a console ecosystem could be. While it's easy for international players to assume that the PocketStation was some weird, obscure, failed add-on, the truth is that it was actually quite popular, and Japan looks back on it rather fondly. It's debatable whether the PocketStation would have found similar levels of success outside of Japan, but its regional popularity shows that the device, at the very least, certainly had a lot of promise. Even if it was totally a ripoff of the VMU, let's not kid ourselves.